Yeah, my presentation, my paper is called The Racial Politics of Dress. And it's about race, identity, and power in LA within the workplace. So it's pretty specific. So the essence of this research came from a self-realization of how clothing fits my body within the context of professional settings. This realization shifted from being self-aware to self-conscious. The more aware of my outer appearance I became, the more conscious I became about the overt and covert feedback I received from outsiders. Ultimately, this ended up being like a cyclical loop, hence the diagram on the screen. And it became a feedback loop as well, in which that overt and covert feedback was about what I was wearing. It was, of course, pertaining to my appearance, and it led to an internal shift in who I thought I was and also who I thought I could be. Out of this, I learned not only that what I wore altered how I felt, but it altered my identity. In the case of this research, identity, with race being at the forefront, acts as a foundation in which how much power one can hold. For instance, in places like America where Caucasian Americans are the majority, a lifestyle standard is set and it's deemed to be the norm. And if this factor has granted that population quite a bit of power. For minorities who do not fit this demographic, power must be gained through alternative forms and methods to kind of level out this imbalance. In places like LA, where fashion makes a statement, dressing up within the workplace aids in giving power to those marginalized groups, and also to give them a voice when they feel silenced. So the context of this research, the setting of this project, it took place and is continuing to take place in Los Angeles, California, in an area in which there are varying political ideologies that are very contrasting. So some strongly oppose others, and it sometimes leads to riots, and that's how far the opposition is. There are two major political parties which consist of majority white conservatives priding themselves in sustaining traditions, and then a majority minority of liberals who take pride in furthering social reformation initiatives. And both are very prevalent and about, I would say, equal within the city. This dichotomy is also injected within working spheres and professional settings, and that's namely where my research took place. By conducting research in such a place, one can easily identify the areas in which power can exist, who has power, who doesn't, and more importantly, how you can gain access to power. I always say that the working sphere that I'm in, and that is probably all throughout LA, is a microclimate of the society itself. So I'll move this over so you all can kind of see. So when I dress up for work, I dress with the intent of appeasing the audience that has the most power. I dress up with the conscious intent of using dress to achieve a goal, even if that goal is to be taken seriously by my white counterpart. What I choose to wear is ultimately a political decision and statement. Although I'm a part of the same demographic in which I'm placing at the forefront of my research, that being African American women, what ultimately granted access to power to my participants had to do with place. Working within the same organization as my participants has greatly helped me to understand the degree in which they had been socially excluded from others. Because they too recognize that I don't and will not have access to certain power positions within my organization, that led me into a place in which I belong to them. Identifying as an African American woman is not what solely helped me to gather data in order to answer how dressing up is a factor in gaining power within professional settings. What truly made me an insider was more about where I've been placed within the organization. And we'll get to more of that later. So for my methodology, all of my participants for this research were given coded numbers to conceal their identities. The organization that I work within is quite large. It consists of over 500 employees, so my participants didn't want to risk choosing a name that already existed within the organization. The conversations took place between all 5 of my participants using a combination of in-person and online mediums. Originally, and because of COVID, I decided it was not best to use visual methods at this time to gather data. although that's something that I do want to use in the future. But it also lent me the opportunity to place how I would gather data aside and rethink what I'd be asking as interview questions. So traditional qualitative research methods were used, such as taking field notes and partaking in participant observations. All of these were done within a variety of settings, ranging from formal to informal. Examples of this were meetings in which the participant acted as the sole representative for their entire department in meetings. And on the other hand, sometimes participants were just calling me for a quick chat or to debrief about the day or to talk about their families. When asking participants a simple question, what are you wearing and why? These answers were almost given in function of events that were going on that very same day. Before a formal meeting, participant number 2 responded to these questions with, I've got on this Ann Taylor top. It needs to look super nice. I'm having a meeting with the boss today, and I want to ask if I can hire another staff member. This request was really major, being that the organization runs on a really tight budget. In an informal meeting with just participant number 5 and myself, it was based around debriefing the day's events. The participant had stated, I just want to get out of these work clothes. And as an act of relaxation during the conversation, the participant did not want to wear anything because they didn't need anything. So some of my results. I immersed myself into a state of deep hanging out when getting to know all 5 African-American women. Originally coined by the anthropologist Clifford Geertz, the term deep hanging out is used to describe informally immersing oneself into a social or cultural group. And that's also done to kind of build trust and to facilitate within the data collection process and to build relationships with your participants. I used thematic analysis to uncover several emerging themes. To begin, all 5 women were aware of the power imbalance that existed between themselves and white males that worked within the same professional setting. This imbalance manifested and was exemplified in numerous ways, including reports of the participants being interrupted, ignored, and talked over in group settings. Also within this professional setting, 1 out of 14 persons that were within the leadership roles were African American, so that's 1 out of 14, and none exist within our senior leadership levels. According to all participants, the lack of diversity within these spheres is accompanied by a lack of awareness regarding culturally insensitive practices, and this is what fuels and kind of perpetuate these imbalances. Frederick Barth came to the conclusion that identity is indeed dependent on exclusions and exclusions. In his book titled Ethnic Groups and Boundaries, the author states, it makes no difference how dissimilar members may be in their overt behavior. If they say they are A, in contrast to the cognate category B, they declare their loyalty and the shared culture of A's. So you can chew on that a little bit. That's kind of why I put it on this slide. Social exclusions, exclusions, and boundaries define the composition of groups. Knowing where one does and does not belong, acknowledging these boundaries, and knowing where one can belong is what aided in me becoming an insider. When adding dress as a factor in leveling out power imbalances, all participants reported that in comparison to white males and females, wearing clothing that is poised, dainty, and feminine is key in being heard and is strongly advised when striving to move upward within the organization. It was heavily emphasized that what is being worn matters for women in the workplace. So no matter how much the company's dress code policies are extremely lenient for women and for men, little to no rules exist. For men, collared shirts must be worn. What is deemed to be a fashion-based freedom by my participants, who are all women, under scrutiny because of judgments and misconceptions regarding their race, also came at a cost. For those women, there was an elimination of a standard set of rules regarding dress that would level out power imbalances that exist based on judgment to their outer appearance. So the freedom actually it didn't feel very free to them. All 5 of these African American women were excluded from obtaining power within a professional setting and use clothes as a way to level out this power imbalance. The more their clothing conservatively hid the curvature of their bodies, the more they were heard and listened to, and they felt like they were seen, and the more power was gained. So in wrapping it up here, discussions and conclusion section, the results of this qualitative research study indicate that dress does indeed increase the degree in which African American women were able to exercise power within the workplace. The racial politics within the professional setting acted as a microclimate to the polarized political setting in all of Los Angeles. In taking this research further, I plan to gather a series of visuals that highlight what the participants wear, how they're feeling when they wear clothing, and escalating and de-escalating power imbalances. And using online video platforms to answer how African American women can gain access to power through the use of clothing, all 5 participants could quickly correlate what they were wearing and how it was in function of what they needed or what they wanted to achieve within the workplace. Dressing up, or the act of doing so, is a conscious effort that levels out the imbalance of social exclusion that exists because of race within the workplace. Thank you so much. Here are all my socials you can add me on, and just really quick, my references.